So welcome everybody. It's an absolute pleasure to welcome you to what is our third and final session of the conference series that we've been hosting over the last 3 weeks, focusing on how the power of governors can influence continuous change to ensure equality for all. We've been putting a spotlight on what blocks young children from deprived backgrounds accessing advantages of their peers, what the common issues are that have led to young people becoming marginalised in the education system. And the third focus, which will really be the thing that we tease out today, exploring what system changes make the biggest difference to address these inequalities in the system. We want you all to engage in this session, which is going to open up with a panel debate. And it won't just be chaired to invite the panel to speak, but the chair will be inviting our audience as well to make comments, to ask questions, so that we can really try and establish a very dynamic session this evening. And I want to tell you that we're going to be recording the session as well, so that we can share it with yourselves and a wider audience beyond this event. We will also, at the close of the conference, be inviting Raymond Atrobus, who is returning to us. He has been to a conference 4 years ago, and we're absolutely delighted. So the conference will come to a close, panel discussion ending at 6 o'clock, and then Raymond will step in and share some heartfelt reflections and a poem that I'm absolutely certain will inspire us to take forward the work we want to do. These, just to give you a little context to this, the first session, for those of you who was with us, invited Hashi Mohammed to talk about individual people with the phrase of people like us. Really gave us the challenge to understand that his story of success was anything but typical, and to really think carefully about how we do, and not just expect the education system, but how we do address inequality for young people. Loic Menzies, who was with us last week, talked more on a policy level, talking about children, who become marginalised, and what is it? How far do they have to be on the margins of something before we judge them to be marginalised and the system steps in? And how does the schools themselves actually become part of the system rather than isolated from it? So there's a much wider system that looks after and cares for and supports our young people. So today, what I'm going to do in a moment now is hand over to our wonderful, skillful chair, Eleanor Schooling, who is the chair of the Hackney School Board, and she will be introducing herself, and then she will take forward this panel discussion. And thank you to all.
Thank you very much, Maggie, and I'm really very pleased to be here with you all this evening, and to be able to share some of the things about myself personally, as well as some of the work that we have done on Hackney Schools Group Board, which I will just start with, because when the first lockdown came, our board, which was very committed to doing a lot of work on belonging, felt that it was very important to do some work with parents during the lockdown to find out from them what they felt about race, and how well issues of race were being tackled or not tackled in their schools, and what they would like to see differently, and I say what was going well. And it really was the most extraordinary experience, because when I tell you a bit more about my background, I think I thought that I'd fought the good fight and that things were a lot better than they actually were. And I was very, very upset to hear some of the things that Black parents told us, and brown parents. And these were not things that meant that schools were necessarily particularly negligent with their work or anything like that. But just those small things, like telling your 4-year-old child, they will have to work harder, they will have to run faster, some people won't like them because of the colour of their skin. I was really, as a white person, appalled that it was still happening, it was still the same. And this goes back to me just telling you a little bit about myself, because when I was a child of a white family, my mother used to send me to school with information for my other classmates to do with my ancestor, my great-great-great-grandfather, who was William Wilberforce. And it was a very interesting experience because I'd taken these information packs about slavery to explain to the teachers and the children in the school all about slavery, because my mother felt very strongly that I should talk to everyone about it. And I was uniformly met with rejection, and people did not want to hear me talking about this. Nevertheless, I grew up with a great sense of pride that I had this ancestor, and it was like maybe I had a free pass as a white person because I had this important ancestor, which of course is not the case. And as I grew up, I began to realise that probably, you know, he wasn't quite as important as I had once hoped, because we always like somebody in our family to be famous and good. And actually the story is much more complex than that. But it did set a mindset for me that had come through my family background. And the reason that I'm telling you that is I think that all our families actually set so much of our mindset and the way that we are as we begin to learn and we grow and we go to school and become young adults. And, you know, as I've grown up, I've done very many things. I've been a teacher, I've been a director of children's services, and at the moment I'm the chair of Hackney Schools Group Board, which is probably one of the most interesting things that I've done in the time that I have been working. But at all that time, the issues of race have emerged again and again, sometimes in my own personal life. I have 3 mixed heritage grandchildren, one of whom did go to a Hackney secondary school and who went to school with the wrong haircut. And as a child who was already a school refuser, to then be sent into isolation because she had the wrong haircut was one of the worst things that could possibly have happened to her. So I do know from a personal experience just how difficult and tricky these things are. And I then ran up to Ridley Road and rushed into all the shops to try and find some ridiculous products that might make my granddaughter's hair look more acceptable for her school, which was exactly the wrong response to have. I did then have a better response, I'll assure you. But you know, these things are extremely complex, and they affect our emotions as well as our rationality. So that's part of my background. And I now feel that we have come to a moment that we will never go back from in this country and actually across the world, particularly around race, where suddenly the conversation has become much more open. And I'm only saying this from my point of view. I hesitate to speak for everybody, but it does feel like change is happening, and change is happening that could not be gone back on, and things may become really quite different for many of the children that are now in our schools. So I am going to ask in a minute our panelists to talk a bit about what changes we feel have been most significant recently, and how are they affecting schools, and how could we further bring those changes to the fore to make some systemic change in our schools, particularly around race, but also around children who are kind of pushed out learners, as Hashim Mohammed talked about. And those are not necessarily the children who are black children, brown children, children from all parts of the world. They may well be, you know, a different subset. So I do think we need to be very careful not to conflate the different experiences and existences that our children have. So I'll just say something quickly about my priorities as well. Having had that experience recently, I now think that we must listen and listen again and listen again when parents talk to us about race, and listen without immediately wanting to respond, but listen to actually hear what's being said, because I think that makes us make different decisions. I think the schools that I've seen since those conversations that have started to really be successful have been ones that have been collaborative with their parents, and they've then done some very dynamic problem solving alongside their parents and changed policies as they've gone along with the parents, and had a very equal problem-solving approach. I'd like to also reference and hopefully go back to some of the other things that Hackney said about shared experiences for young people, and all paid for experiences that are outside of your family and outside of your school, because I think that does change how you see the world going forward. So those are some of the things that are priorities for me. So what I'm going to do with the panel is I'm going to ask each person, and I'll say your name so you know that I'm asking you to speak next, to introduce yourself, and then to answer a bit about this question. So what really significant changes have you recently seen that you think we can now build on, and that we won't go back on? So I'm going to start at the top with Mohsen, if that's okay with you, if you can introduce yourself, please.
Thank you, Elena. So my name is Mohsen Oja. I'm Deputy Chief Executive of the Mosbourne Federation, and I've been at the Federation for approximately 2 years. Just to get into that time. Before that, I was a National Director of a multi-academy trust in England, leading 28 schools. And before that, I led a cluster of schools within that trust. And I was also a principal of a large secondary academy in London. So my background is obviously school leadership, working in urban complex context, as they are called. So, with very diverse communities, with the opportunities and challenges that presents. I think the question that you pose is a very interesting one, and I would say that on a personal level, certainly, until 2020, I never considered myself as being any different, and I think. And what I mean by that is I was very aware of who I was. I've got a good sense of identity, but I think the tragic events that happened in 2020 highlighted a sense of identity within within my community, within my surroundings, and certainly that made me think about about who I was, about my values, etc. But I think I realized also that experience was reverberated across the community, and I think you're absolutely right in saying that there's been a change, and that change has been leading to a number of events, and that culminated, for example, in Hackney, arranging and organizing the activities around anti-racism, which I have to say. Hackney should be commended for the proactive approach and effort. And certainly, when I attended, some of the events, I was very impressed with the and humbled as well with the quality of the debate that was going on. I think I would stick to 3 things, Elena. So from my perspective, you're absolutely right as well about listening. So we reached out to your organization to arrange a listening exercise with our parents, because we fully appreciated that shift within the community, and we wanted to really understand what the real perspective was, not the kind of that we get from hearsay. We really wanted to hear from our community, and as a result of that, we've made many changes to some of our practices. For example, we've used student, staff, and parent voice to review our uniform and appearance policy, particularly with hair, and we will continue to listen as well. We did plan for another listening session this side of the summer holidays, but unfortunately, for logistical reasons, we haven't been able to organize it, but that's certainly something that we'll plan for the next academic year. I think at Mosbourne, we have been uncompromising about our strategic drive to continue to talk about anti-racism. And this is obviously something that's very important to us. and this is something that I am strategically leading on. And you know, the conversations that have been had with our stakeholders have been very enriching, at times very challenging, because it made us really appreciate, certainly it made me really appreciate the difference of perspective of people's lived experiences, and it works on both sides, you know, colleagues and stakeholders from underrepresented groups, as well as colleagues who you know are white as well. So for us, anti-racism across the Federation is a paramount priority, and you know, it's not something that we've taken a tokenistic approach. It's certainly something that is happening on a day-to-day basis. So as well as the review of our uniform and appearance policy and the change to the form names that our student body wanted to review, we now have, for example, a fully comprehensive racial fluency program that is going to be delivered to all of our staff, or in excess of 500 staff across the Federation in the next academic year. We also have designed.
I want to hurry you.
Yeah, I will, and I've just got one point to make. I've designed a leadership program specifically for colleagues who are ambitious leaders who come from underrepresented groups, and I think the best thing that we can continue doing for our children, and we know that we serve a very diverse community, is to continue our drive for uncompromising excellent outcomes, because we know that's ultimately what makes the biggest difference. Sorry, I've taken more than a minute and a half, but I do have a tendency to talk. So next time, feel free to stop me.
Thank you. Thank you very much for a very eloquent introduction to yourself. I'm going to go to you, Diane, next, and ask you to introduce yourself and perhaps also reflect on what's happened and what you think.
Thank you, Eleanor, and good afternoon. Actually, good evening, everybody. So, yeah, my name is Diane Benjamin, and I am the Director of Children's Social Care in Hackney. Actually celebrating an anniversary. I've been in Hackney a year now as the Director of Children's Social Care. So lots to kind of reflect on, as well as celebrating a year being here. And Eleanor, like my colleague, just kind of thinking about those reflections about where we are, where we were, and that journey that we still absolutely need to continue with. So just thinking about having the conversations now, I think, you know, I feel we're certainly much more braver about having those conversations, and those conversations are about race and racism. Those conversations are about how is that affecting our practice. I talk about practice in terms of children's social care and how we can impact an outcome in terms of practice. You know, the basics in terms of looking at referrals that are coming in. What's the lens we're looking at when we're looking at children coming into children's social care, and having that statutory lens. I say that, Eleanor, because I think there's some stark data that I need to look at, and I am looking at and doing a bit of a deep dive about, you know, 80% of children coming through the system, through the door at the moment, and having a long-term intervention, a Black and global majority. And most of our white families are getting a family support service or no further social work action. So, you know, one needs to think about what that's about and understand what kind of service our children and families are getting. In addition to that as well, thinking about the workforce and that racialized trauma in terms of, you know, just having the conversations, but, you know, Black and global majority members and stuff having to kind of have those constant conversations again. We need to be in a space where everybody's having the conversation, rather than just that one voice or that one particular area of the community having those conversations, and also the community as well. We need to win trust back in terms of what that looks like for us. So yeah, I just think there's for me, as a Black woman, and thinking about my position and thinking about the use of self and how I understand and how I work with colleagues as well. It's for me, we're having those conversations. You know, I work really closely with Annie, and I've got a really good working relationship. But, you know, I will push those boundaries, as Annie will do as well, in terms of having those really challenging conversations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dan. Thank you. I'm going to come to you next, Katie. and ask you similarly to just introduce yourself and talk about some of the priorities that we hope we'll never go back from now.
As an introduction, I started the secondary maths teacher, became very uncomfortable with a black head of year who seemed to be okay with lines of black boys being outside the head teacher's office. Didn't like it, didn't have any way of controlling that because I was too young. Retrained, went into special, and that's been my passion throughout my career. Very happy in an urban environment. That's where I function best. I came to Hackney in 2008. I'm fortunate enough to have had secondary experience. I was an assistant head in a secondary school in special measures in Lewisham. We got it out, and I actually came to Hackney as an interim head of a primary school, which was Burbage and is now Hoxton Garden. Following that, I was invited to come to the Trust as a senior inclusion advisor, and then asked to step into a very difficult situation in a secondary special school in Hackney, but we managed to secure a good Ofsted, and then the whole Building Schools for the Future took off, and you know, I was very fortunate to be involved in the design of the new school. We amalgamated with a primary school called Downsview, which that was in, I think, 2014. We got that a good Ofsted. Then I was asked to help Ickborough School, which was without a head at that time. So I did that, secured a good Ofsted for them. And meanwhile, the Garden School, as is, we managed to get an outstanding Ofsted in 2014. That school was initially for about 80, 90 students. We now have 150 students on one site and on a new site, very happy with that. And now we've managed to, with the support of Hackney Education, they led on a newly refurbished site on the old Ickborough School site, which is the post-16 site. So in fact, you know, my time here, it's been a wonderful kind of you know, development and support for our young people who have a diagnosis of autism and severe learning difficulties. So they are some of the most, I'm not going to use the term marginalised because, you know, I do take Loic's point, but they are on the margins, and it is a continuum. As he said, it's not an either or situation. And so, you know, I suppose that's where I'm coming from. And I'm more reflecting the SEND element, you know, because the majority of our students are all Black and global majority. We have a plethora of different staff who are represented. And I suppose in one sense, you know, I have gone and talent managed and tried to get a better profile of staff in terms of leadership positions, because I do think, you know, that's important for our own senior team. But that's where I'm at, Eleanor. That's okay. Me.
Thank you very much, Katie. I'm going to go to Sylvia next, because I know that you've come because Reese can't be with us today, and we're really grateful that you could come. Sylvia works for Hackney Young Futures, but I'll ask you to introduce yourself and say a bit about the work. Thank you.
Thank you, Eleanor, and thanks for the invite. Yes, unfortunately, Reese couldn't be here with us today, but I'm stepping in not as a young person myself, but as someone who lives and works in Hackney and who's working very closely with Reese. I've got a background in education and particularly working with migrant families, so I'm acutely aware of some of the issues that they face as a family in terms of inequalities, racism, issues of poverty, and how to support their children through the educational system. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about Hackney Young Futures. I think it's a great opportunity for Hackney to continue working with young people internally, continue that conversation, and make sure that young people's voices are embedded within our decision-making processes. Just a brief background on what Hackney Young Future is. So Hackney, there was a commission called Hackney Young Futures Commission that was set up and run between 2018 and 2019. It was an independent commission, but organized, funded, and accountable to the council. Throughout the 2 years that it was active, it carried out extensive engagement with young people, very, very thorough and in a very participatory manner. And it gained a lot of insights from young people. That was then followed by a period of co-production to publish its report. And out of the report, young people in Hackney are asking the council to carry out and use the 21 asks and 73 recommendations, which are quite detailed, but with the overarching aim of making sure that young people are embedded in the structures and the decision-making processes of the council. And I think that's one of the things, going back to your question, one of the significant changes that I have seen is this willingness of moving from consultation and engagement done to people to a conversation and dialogue for solutions done with people rather. So that's the kind of thing that Hackney and Future, as it is now in its implementation phase, is trying to embed within Hackney Council's structures and in relation to young people. And I'm afraid I can't stay very long today. I'm really sorry, but if anyone has any follow-up or any queries about Hackney and Futures, I'm very happy to get in touch with people.
Thank you, thank you. And they could put that in the chat, that would be really helpful. Thank you for coming, Sylvia, at such short notice. I'm going to go to Annie Gammon next, and I'm particularly going to ask you, Annie, to think about the priorities that, as you see them, for sustaining progress on some, because I think we have suddenly made a real burst of fantastic progress. And so what's the most important thing for us to be doing and thinking about now?
Thanks very much, Eleanor. Yes, good to be with you, everybody. I'm Annie Gammon, Director of Education. And before I was Director of Education, I was a head teacher, and I've been working in schools in North East London for over 30 years. I think that the changes I wanted to talk about that I have seen happen more recently and that I want to see sustained are some things that colleagues have mentioned already. I think that fundamental embedding of listening to groups of those children, those parents, those staff with lived experience of being in a Black and global majority child, member of staff, parent, and also listening to your more vulnerable children. So I think children with special educational needs or disabilities, the children who Ofsted would talk about the lower attaining 20%, really focusing on their experiences. And I think that we've seen those listening groups, and we've heard colleagues on the call already talk about those. I think those need to be part of our week in, week out, half-termly practice, that we regularly listen and listen well and act. So I think that listening is really important. I think that one of the things, and sometimes the listening needs safe spaces. So I do think that there is listening. I, as a white person, can listen to my Black colleagues, but I'm also well aware that my Black colleagues might also want some safe spaces to talk freely and then present something together. So I think it's quite important for us to think about that. I think that I have seen a much greater appointment of colleagues from Black and global majority backgrounds at senior levels in education, both in schools, in the education service itself, and actually I'm pleased to say in the whole of the Hackney Council. And I think that's really important for, partly as Diane said, about having role models, but to have colleagues with, again, with lived experience, making senior level strategic decisions, making decisions that change the culture of the organisation is really important. And I think for governors listening, I think that's also important about governing bodies. And we've seen that with the Young Governors Initiative, that's really brought diversity to some of our governing bodies. I think it's really important how we treat those governors and making sure that they are welcome and heard. And I think one of the key things is about making sure that we have, Mossen talked about this, about professional development, so that colleagues that they get really good sort of professional development ladders into more senior positions, so that it's not somebody who's had perhaps an easier time through their professional development, but that we're really making sure that we think hard and give everybody an opportunity, so that we see more and more staff who reflect the community that they teach. I think that's it from me for the moment, Eleanor.
Thank you very much, Annie. Thank you. I'm going to move to Chris now, Christopher McGee, who is a governor as well as being a member of Hackney Schools Group Board. And in introducing yourself, Chris, I wonder if you could also reflect on something that both Annie and Katie have spoken about, and the parents that spoke to us earlier on a couple of years ago now also talked about having, you know, staff from the same background as their children in senior positions in the school. And I know you've been doing a lot of work on it, Chris, so we'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, so I'm Chris. I have been Chair of Governors at Princess May Primary School in Dalston probably for over a decade. That doesn't mean I started when I was 15, but I did start at a relatively young age. I've also been on the Hackney School Group Board since its inception. And I think my passion for education in large part comes from, you know, social mobility and disrupting what I call the sort of poverty life cycle, and that sense that I certainly felt when I was, you know, 14, 15, 16, that if from an intergenerational perspective, you grew up in poverty, irrespective, I think, of what community you live in, it's really, really hard to escape that poverty life cycle. It's extraordinarily hard. So how can education be a vehicle to disrupt that poverty life cycle? And I think it really is a strong vehicle to do so. And just yesterday, we at my school got our SATs results, which were absolutely phenomenal and probably the best we've had since the school, well, at least since I've been Chair of Governors. And, you know, just seeing that and speaking to our head teacher about the impact of all of our interventions and hard work and core education, and to see the output at really good SATs results is really warming. And I think the start of disrupting that social, poverty life cycle. So that's a little bit about my interest. I think just in terms of the specific question then about sort of diversity of senior leadership, clearly I'm working on a project as part of the school board on trying to look at what the landscape looks like in Hackney for Black and global majority people in senior positions, head teacher, deputy head teacher, and assistant head teacher. And I think it's fair to say that it doesn't reflect what Hackney looks like as a whole. So we're hoping to do a bit of work on that, first to understand the landscape and what that looks like, and then second to think about whether or not there's instances of good practice across Hackney about Black and global majority people in senior leadership positions in schools, and whether or not any of that can be replicated. Now, clearly this is something we've heard when we spoke to parents, something we heard 2 years ago, and something I think we need to act on. And, you know, it's good to hear from, you know, people like Katie who are saying, actually, I'm trying to encourage people into leadership positions from different types of communities. I think that's essential. And I think linked to that is diversity of governors. And obviously Annie spoke about that. I think if you've got diversity of a governing body, their perspective, their challenge, their sense of what the school looks like is going to be different. And we've had a young governor on our governing body. And I was saying the other day to Maggie, you know, it's really been impactful. It's been a really great thing. And if anything, I feel somewhat sympathetic for the young governor, because in many ways it's felt like he's come on as a governor without that wraparound protection of being a sort of new young governor. But he's thrown himself into the deep end, and it's been great to have that, I think, different perspective. So I think there's something there about diversity of what a governing body looks like. I don't think we're there yet, actually. And I think there's more to do. just last week in my day job, I work in apprenticeships and vocational qualifications. We have a all-white senior leadership team, and we're recruiting a new chief financial officer. And quite provocatively at the end of our meeting, I said, well, we are an all-white senior leadership team. What are we doing to get the best pool of candidates from people who don't look like us? And there was a lot of faces in the room that were like, a bit like, okay, but I think sometimes you need to be provocative, challenging, and trying to generate opportunities for different people, whether that's people from the BME community, whether that's gay people, whether that's disabled people, whether that's women, depending what the organisation looks like. So I think to sort of sum up, I think we're going to do some good work, I hope, with this project on senior leaders from the Black and Global Majority Group in Hackney. I hope it's impactful. It certainly won't revolutionise the world. It won't remedy every wrong we've seen, but it might be a small movement to make things slightly better. So I hope that's helpful. Happy to debate it later as we see fit.
Thank you very much, Chris. And small differences often have big outcomes, so don't underestimate the importance of this work for very many reasons. I'm going to come to you now, Lisa. I know you're the head teacher of Comet Nursery School and Children's Centre, and I'd particularly like to ask you about what's your priority in this changed environment, where I think we are already much more proactive in listening and tackling issues of race. And so what would it be for you that systemically we could do something different on?
Yeah, so I'm the head at Comet Nursery School and Children's Centre, and we also run Comet at Thomas Fairchild, which is another children's centre over there. I came into teaching in a very different route. I was a nursery nurse and have worked my way through the education system to become a head teacher. I've been at Comet for 11 years, in Hackney for 11 years, but have been a head teacher for about 15 years in different London local authorities. I'm interested in, so part of the work I've been doing is I've done a master's in education and culture, language and identity. So I feel that a lot of this conversation is really close to my heart and what I learned in my master's, which was really eye-opening and much more challenging and conversational than I thought it was, you know, when I entered into that. Just to say, I'm also from Wembley, so I went to Wembley High, where Hashim Mohammed went to school, not in the same year in any sense, quite a few years apart, but I do know when he talks about the school and how that worked, it was very interesting. I think that one of the things that he was saying about was how important it was to think of the first 4 years of life for our very young children. And for me, we are at the very first start of a child's educational life, but we're also right at the beginning. So the Children's Centre, where we have baby time and we're meeting and parents are coming into the centre for the very first time. For us, that's a great privilege. You know, my passion is early years, and it's a real privilege to see parents coming into the centre with their tiny babies and looking and seeing how that pans out for those families and how that works for them. We really have worked a lot on children's lived experiences and their funds of knowledge. So where children come from, where their background is, and really trying to reflect that into our school. So we've really done a lot of work more recently around, do children see themselves in our environment? Do they see themselves in the books that we have? Do they see themselves in the work that we're doing? We've also worked quite hard on the staff team. So our staff team are from a very diverse background. We're in a sort of an area where it's majority Turkish, and we have 3 Turkish-speaking members of staff in different roles within the setting, and that we know, you know, makes a real difference to those families, because they can come in and they can converse and communicate, and that really makes a difference. So I think our staffing has been something that I feel very proud of, that we're a very diverse community, diverse staff. I'm the only white person on the senior leadership team. There is only 3 of us, and we're all women, but you know, that brings a different dynamic, doesn't it? It means that we're able to think more broadly about every community that comes into the nursery and into the children's centre. I think the other thing that we've really looked at is many of these children are lockdown babies. They were born in lockdown in very difficult circumstances. So we've really been working hard on how we can support every family in an inclusive and integrated provision. We have high numbers of children with special educational needs, and for us there's also that notion of intersectionality when it comes to the different multiple often discriminations that families come across. So we've really been working hard on our inclusive and integrated and welcoming environment.
Thank you so much for that, and that particularly I think resonates with the things that Hashim Mohammed was talking about. Those first 4 years are so incredibly important. I'd also like to say thank you to David Howells, who's been very complimentary about going to Mossbourne yesterday in the school sports day. It's really good to hear that it was, you know, it was so good. I'd like to come back to a couple of the panelists, and I'd like Diane to ask you a question about what you told us about having such high numbers of Black and global majority families as the families that you're working with. And provocatively, because I sort of feel perhaps this is the case, is it because of the way that white people and all staff look at Black families, that means they're more likely to be more critical of the way they're bringing up their children? Or is it something else? Because it's very difficult to believe that certain kinds of ethnicity mean that you're a less good parent, which I'm sure we wouldn't say, but so what is your thinking about this?
I think, Eleanor, there are several hypotheses really, and kind of one needs to kind of be clear about what we're talking about, because there are different elements. So there is that, for me, where Black and global majority boys are overrepresented within the care system. And why is that? I think that, you know, we look at Black boys differently. I think we perceive them as adults, and that adultification is that lens, is that perception. And therefore the service that they get is different. And then they come into the care system and their life chances are somewhat diminished because of that. So I think that's potentially one element. I think when I think about practice when I think about practice in the way practitioners practice, there's lots of P's there, but I think it's about perceptions. And, you know, you can read, a white practitioner and a black global majority practitioner can read the same information about a family and make different decisions. And that's what, you know, I want to kind of unmask in some respect. Why are we making different decisions for different types of families? And that's where my data tells me that, you know, majority of my Black and global majority families are on a child protection plan. Why is that? You know, we look at physical abuse, for example, and it's a one-off incident, but a family will be subjected to a child protection plan, whereas if it was a white family, they would get a letter, or they would get a warning, and they would be told about potential consequences. So I think it is about practice and the way we perceive and receive information as well. I also think about the complaints as well. You know, we're doing some work with our complaints team as well. How do we get our complaints team to think about their anti-racist practice within that? I'd like more complaints to be coming through from Black and global majority families saying, I'm complaining about this, but I'm also complaining because I feel and I perceive the racist element as well. And it's about getting mindset change in terms of understanding that. Nobody wants complaints to go up, but I'd like to see complaints go up in that respect. And then I need to be able to equip the complaints team with the tools to be able to manage those complaints as well. And it's about something what Annie says about how we then hold staff, how we then upskill staff to be able to, okay, it's not a criticism of you, but, you know, we are living in a racist society. We are living in a structural racism. So one needs to understand this is going to be an element and this is going to be an issue. So it is about upskilling staff as well, getting them to understand that that's part of their work and they need to understand that as well. So I think, Eleanor, different, one can hypothesize about why, but I think, I'd need to think about which part of the service are we thinking about, where is the need, thinking about all those elements, and I think to answer it in the realm is really challenging for me. So hence, hopefully I've answered the question.
Thank you. That's really, really helpful, and I think it raises something that we heard from the parents that we spoke with, and which I've heard again and again, which is that here I'm not obviously, but I am a black parent. Here I am at the school. How do you see me? How are you looking at me? Are you really seeing me for who I am as a person? Or are you making a whole set of judgments before you even hear me speak and talk with me? And I think of all the things that I learned, that's one of the most important. And it's something that we all have to kind of search in our hearts about, and think, what am I doing when I'm talking to this man? And have it continually there, because it's not an easy thing to overcome. We've got so many things that we've grown up with, and so many, misconceptions about people. And I think it's hard work. And I think that if governors thinking about governors, today, can support staff in doing that work to think about how we treat people, that can have a very major impact in all sorts of ways, and how we see people. So that's sort of very much chimes with me. Now, I was going to come back to Annie as well, because I know, Annie, you wanted to say some other things about your priorities. So do you want to just come back to us now?
Yeah, I wanted to say two slightly different things. One was following up from what Diane said about how children can be treated differently and how important it is across schools to be aware and to be sure that you are treating children fairly and with the highest expectations. And I was just thinking about that difference. I know adultification was mentioned, and there have been some very high profile cases really in Hackney with child Q, and more cases playing out in public linked to the police. But I think on one level that happens in schools as well, where how might some black boys who are hanging out by a radiator be asked to move on compared to some white girls? How might some short children perhaps be treated compared to some tall children? And tall children might be expected to be older when they're not necessarily. They will be in year 7 and 8. And I think the point that Diane was mentioning about when do we contact parents is really important, because there can be, I think, with adultification, which is a racist approach, an approach that you think, well, the child is grown up enough already, I don't need to contact their parents, or perhaps. So I think that expectation across all our schools that every child will be treated as a child. They are a child, maturing, and that their parents are involved in their upbringing and education is a really important one. And I think some of that and some of the work we talked about earlier will get fed into our Hackney Inclusion and Diversity Charter. I'm really pleased to say that we've appointed a systems leader for taking that work forward, working with secondary and primary schools. And I think that will really support the consistency of our work across Hackney, and they will draw on that really best practice work at early years as well. I think the other thing I wanted to emphasize was something that Mawson said, was that all this takes place with our expectation in education of the highest standards for every child. We need to be ambitious for every child, for how they do in education and what they will do beyond education. And I believe really strongly, and this is what we're working towards again with the Inclusion and Diversity Charter, that those high standards and high inclusion coexist, so that we can have high standards and be including all children in those high standards. And that's certainly something that will be front and centre in our Inclusion and Diversity Charter.
Thank you, Annie. And I think the Inclusion and Diversity Charter is going to be something very important moving forward for all schools, because it's a way of thinking about what you do. It's not simply something that you sign up to. It is much more than that. It's a very dynamic thing. And I've just been reflecting that there are things that governors can very influentially ask about. And we all know that if you ask the right question, it then prompts people to think about things. And it prompts them then quite often to do something about those things. And I think simply asking whose parents have been contacted, not with names, over a certain period of time, as governors would be a very interesting exercise. And you know, what is the ethnicity of those children, and what is the age of those children? You know, there are many questions, quite innocent questions, that you can ask and then begin to open up a discussion about the way that children are treated in the school. And I think that sometimes in the busyness of the day in school, some of those very basic things about, is this good enough for my child? Is this good enough for my niece, my grandchild, whoever it is? You know, that question has to be asked over and over again. I think constantly, all the time, so that we don't then give responsibility to somebody else to pick up and deal with issues, who then maybe won't be as close to the child and as able to deal with the issue in the first place. Now, I wanted to just come back to people, particularly around the progress that we've already made in Hackney, and you've talked a lot about that, Annie. And I wonder if we could go all the way back to some of the earliest panelists, and maybe, Mohsen, ask you a bit more now about reflecting on what you've heard, and particularly reflecting on the changes. You talked about how since 2020 things had become really quite different within your own community, and you know, you highlighted that identity was then reverberating through your community. So what are the other differences that you might think are going to be instrumental in further change in schools? Can I put you on the spot there?
Yeah, thanks, Elena. No, I think the the expectations of the community and the aspirations of the community are a real thing. You know, we have a duty to respond to that, and you know, reflecting on what's been achieved at Mosbourne, you know, there is the you know, academic achievements, and the track record speaks for itself. You know, in the primaries now, as well as in the secondaries. I know you know, there was the, you know, the kind of legacy issue, but we seem to have resolved it. I think, and again, I'm talking based on the time that I've spent there. I can reflect, you know, if to pick on something that that was mentioned earlier. For us, the role of the governors has been instrumental in holding us to account, in driving that strategy forward. You know, we are very fortunate to have a body of very committed and very able governors who have been asking the right questions, and sometimes the difficult questions, but at the same time they've been able to contribute very positively, and you know, the evidence. One of the biggest examples is the impact of our extracurricular programs. So not only do we believe in academic excellence, but we also do a lot of work around enhancing the cultural capital of children who wouldn't normally be able to access those opportunities. And I know that was one of the themes of this session. And we are proactive in our endeavors to make sure that we put all of those opportunities, and our governors have been phenomenally supportive, to the point where, you know, we've benefited from some networking events that they've been able to, you know, they created for us. From a fundraising perspective, we've been able to tap into some phenomenal resources, and you know, and also having access to, for example, we needed to do a lot of publicity and advertising for the program, and one of our governors who works in the media has been able to support us in linking that, and that is, you know, might sound kind of a little bit out there, but the impact it's had in enhancing the program, in increasing the participation levels, to go from, I think 4 years ago, it was like, I think the proportion of non-white children was something about like 17%. We're looking at 45 or 46% this academic year of all our athletes. So I have to say that, you know, the changes that are happening are, in my view, positive changes. I think the more conversations that we have around the topic that is not a comfortable topic to talk about, the better we will be. And it is just about, you know, for us, is making sure that you know, we keep our eyes on delivering the best standards we can to our stakeholders, our community, and we listen. We just continue to listen and give them an opportunity to tell us how they feel, and if they feel that they can contribute and they want to add something, we'd be more than happy to do that. And then can I just answer one of the points that was raised in the chat, just to reassure David. The program for sixth forms, whilst they don't take part in the sports day, classic sports day, there is a very comprehensive sports program that they can access. So rowing, for example, is aimed at children aged 11 all the way to 19. So just to reassure you, we do ensure that they get the same opportunities as well. It might not look like, you know, a kind of sports day as you would expect, but there's definitely opportunities for them. Sorry, I just
thank you. No, thank you very much. Now, I don't want to rush everybody, but I'd like to come back for one other word to Katie, because you talked really interestingly early on about changing the profile of the staff in your school, and a lot of the changes that happened in every place that you went to. So what do you think are the lessons from that, Katie, that would be really useful for governors, and particularly focusing, I think, sometimes on the children who might be pushed away from learning because they're harder to work with?
I'm going to kind of answer it in my response, Anna, but I've got so many things going on in my head, just picking up on one or two points, if that's okay, from colleagues. I think, you know, with regard to what Diane said about, you know, race, I think race is always tricky, because there has to be a recognition that often, you know, people are at different stages of development. So you will find that people from the Black and global majority are highly cognizant of, you know, unconscious bias, decolonization, for example, adultification, and that might have an impact in what you offer in terms of training. You know, you might want to do specific training for colleagues who are not of that ilk, you know, so because I think sometimes perhaps it can be patronizing or viewed as patronizing to some of, you know, the more cognizant of you know, of us who are aware of that, and that's a culture shift. So strategically looking at that, you know, in ensuring access to equality of education, you know, it does require addressing a wide range of persistent inequalities, and that takes time and a culture shift. I think you could argue with Hackney that, you know, it's taken George Floyd and maybe Child Q, it's accelerated the process, because I think we were already kind of there in one sense, looking at the, you know, specifically say the exclusion of Black boys and their offer. So that was just one sort of comment. One thing that I find is a challenge, and, you know, I think, you know, I have heard colleagues say that in leadership positions, that they are not racist and their school is not racist. And I think that's another thing that is of concern, because, you know, where is that coming from? You know, I think it's an education, a training, a whole kind of vista which needs opening up, because it can get very personalized. You know, and in terms of the charter with your vocabulary, you know, we've heard all kinds of references today to Black, brown, minority, Black and global majority. I think in terms of policy, and this is picking up on what Chris said, which resonated a lot with me, was that element of poverty. You know, that is universal. And if you listen to Loic, you know, I think he says that poverty is policy responsive. And if we don't have those policies, you know, it's all very well talking about what's going on the ground and, you know, what's going in one school, but, you know, are we sharing the good practice? Are we, you know, looking at policies to make, you know, give us a really uniform, you know, bash really at this issue, because if we don't do that, then, you know, the same will continue, and it will improve, but not at the rate that we used to. So yeah, that's my offer.
Thank you very much, and we're about to move on. So that was a fantastic note to end on, because I do think it's so important to remember that culture shift takes time. You know, this is about, it is very much about policy, because policy can make a big change if the policy is right, or it can have a very negative impact. But it is responsive to that. And I think that if we can make sure that there is enough time for that cultural shift to happen, people will continue to learn, I think, continue in an accelerated way, because there has been an acceleration at the moment. And I think that this description, either by schools themselves or by others, that a school is racist, is a very difficult one for us to tackle, because immediately everybody feels angry and defensive, and that is not an excuse for poor behaviour by any means. That's not what I'm saying, but we've got to be able to talk to one another and understand and hear. And we've got to be able to hear if a parent, and I have been in a meeting where a parent has said that, we've got to be able to hear that and understand that, but that takes strength, and we've got to build the strength to be able to have those conversations. I think that's what I'm saying. So I think now we're going to move to our closing remarks from Jackie, and then she's going to introduce Raymond Atrobus too as well. So I'd like to thank all of the panellists in this discussion, which has been very rich and very interesting. And must continue to be part of an ongoing conversation. And hand over to Jackie. And I can't see you because of something on my screen, so I hope that you're there, Jackie.
I am here, and I hope that people can see me. I'm actually at a conference, so I'm in a strange environment. But I felt it was really important to join. I didn't want to miss this, because I think this conference series has been really important, and it's not the end, it's not the answer. See, I'm in a hotel room. It's not the answer, but it's a point at which we're having really important conversations together. And the series is obviously focused on the power of governors and how governors can influence systemic change and ensure equity for all. And I'm choosing my word here because it's not about equality, it's about equity. And sometimes you have to do, to make things equal, you don't treat people the same. And I think we've got to really bear that in mind. And we've really aimed to particularly explore how social class and race impacts children's education experiences. And we cast our minds back to Hashim Mohammed. He explained why his story of success is far from typical. And, he emphasized that it takes far more than education to remove deep divisions that blocks children from different backgrounds from accessing the advantages of their peers. And he proposed 3 priorities that would make the biggest difference. And one was invested in the first 4 years of children's lives. The other was giving the local authorities the power to build affordable housing. And another one was about giving the opportunity for more young people to experience somewhere outside of Hackney, all expenses paid, so they could widen their horizons at a much younger age than they might other do. So being exposed to different experiences. I mean, I'm happy to say that some of these priorities reflect what we're doing as a council, and the third priority particularly links to some of the manifesto commitments of our members. So Loic Menzies gave us a really powerful narrative in his second session, and really got under the skin of the issues that lead young people to feel marginalised and be marginalised in the education system. And he highlighted the need for school to be integrated rather than isolated from the wider systems that support young people. And I think that really challenges us as a system where we have academies, we have faith schools, we have maintained schools. How do we come together? How do we hold all of our children in Hackney as a single system, and we don't fall into the divisions as a system? So I'm really glad that we've had today's session as well, because it's been brought together by our Hackney partners, and it's really highlighted the main challenges, the key priorities and actions that will make the biggest difference to ensure that every child, regardless of their race, their ethnicity, their class, achieves an equal share of success in adult life. And that, you know, that's got to be our goal. We've had some really powerful thoughts on how we might galvanise all Hackney partners in a collective pursuit to address inequalities. And what we must do, what I must do, what you must do, what governors must do now, because this is about action, it's not about conversation. So I think these sessions have generated lots of ways, lots for us to take away, lots for us to reflect, but absolutely things for us to do and act, because the conversation is the start, but the action and the continual action and the continual speaking up is what we must commit to. So to close our conference, we're also truly honoured to introduce, I'm truly honoured to introduce Raymond Atrobus, MBE. So many of you will recall Raymond closing our conference in 2019, when he had published his debut collection, The Perseverance, which won multiple prestigious accolades, including the Rathbone Folio Prize and the Ted Hughes Award. Raymond's poems explore language, miscommunication, place and memory, sound and silence, and conflicting racial and cultural identities. Raymond is probably the most important young poet of his generation. He's born in Hackney, the son of an English mother and a Jamaican father. Raymond will reflect on growing up in Hackney, will challenge us to consider how we change systems in the adult hearing world and its denial of access to all, and close by reading a poem that we all know will resonate and inspire us to do so much more. Over to you, Raymond. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Hello, an honor to be here. Thank you for inviting me to this space. I'm like listening to all the things that have been said. I'm kind of overwhelmed with different ways that I can respond to it. I suppose I should give some context to what my experience was growing up in Hackney. So I was brought up, like my dad lived in a council estate called Hebden Court. My mum lived in a house off Queensbridge Road, and my parents didn't know I was deaf until I was around 6-7 years old. And at the time, Hackney didn't have very strong infrastructure for people who were deaf. So I actually had to relocate, and I went to a school with a deaf unit in Muswell Hill. It took me an hour and 20 minutes to get to school every day for 5 years. So when I think about that, the kind of extra work that has gone into, you know, that traveling that distance to school, the neurological strain, plus your brain adjusting to hearing aids. And I guess something I want to talk a bit about, since like the word diversity has been used so much, and of course it's a word that makes a lot of people cringe, I suppose, nowadays, because of how flat the word seems to have become. But a few years ago, I went back to write a play about, I suppose, growing up, coming through special educational needs, going to a deaf school, being part of both a hearing world, a deaf world, a mainstream schooling and a deaf schooling, and having all of that as part of my experience. I came across a report, and I suppose this is to reference what was said about how Black young people of color are often adulted. I heard that word earlier. So there was this report that said that I was falling asleep in lessons. It said I wasn't very attentive. It said I was very quiet. And then it said something like, we've just found out that Raymond is half Jamaican, but he's not very street. And then a bit further on, it said something like, Raymond is often very tired and he's falling asleep in lessons. We're wondering if he's smoking weed. And I just had to, like, reading it now as an adult and then being like, wait a minute, what date was this? And realizing I was 11 years old when these kind of reports were being written about me. I realized that the only way I actually got through the educational system in England, I suppose, in London, in Hackney, in Muswell Hill, where I had another part of my education, was through individual teachers, and most of those teachers were teachers of the deaf. I just want to acknowledge them now, because I don't know where they are now, but I just want to say Miss Macassa, Penny Wilds, Miles, Renata, Sophie Walker, Teresa Willis, wherever you are, thank you, you saved my life, because the system itself is just not, too many people fall through the cracks of it. And then just to kind of give, I suppose, another, I don't know, interesting detail to those reports that were written. Some of them were written by British Nigerians. So it wasn't all white women writing it, although a lot of it, most of it was white women, but then so it just, that was also throwing another kind of interesting, I suppose, layer to, not just, black, white, you've also got like the Nigerian, Jamaican kind of prejudice as well that can get kind of thrown in, or even an African Caribbean prejudice that can get thrown in to the way in which a young person is pathologized or understood. Again, I've got so much to say. I'm just looking at the time. So do feel free to intercept and tell me to stop speaking and just read a poem. But I guess another thing I wanted to talk about was my specialty, I suppose my training is in something called emotional literacy. So for the last 10 years or so, I've been going into not just schools, like, mainstream schools and deaf schools, but I also go into prisons, men's high security prisons. I spent a lot of time in Whitmore prison in Cambridge, because there is a disproportionate amount of black and brown men from Hackney in those prisons. And they used my first book in a reading club, The Perseverance. And so many of the inmates there resonated and recognized the places that I talk about, Broadway Market and London Fields, that they invited me in. And that's how I kind of built a relationship with the prisoners, or the men from Hackney in a high security prison in Cambridge. But all this is to say, like, I kind of go into all of these spaces with this, I suppose, philosophy of trying to promote the power and importance of being able to articulate oneself to your environment, to your surroundings, and the essential importance of being understood on your own terms. And I feel so much of that work is in the language that we use. So much of that work is in how we relate to each other. But unfortunately, the kind of infrastructure and the kind of atmosphere in which our systems and our politics and our workspaces operate in go against that. So I feel like everything I've heard in this conference actually is a kind of resistance against the default tone, default mode of our system. So I just want to say that I appreciate that and appreciate hearing that. It gives me courage and strength to carry on. I think what I will say now is a poem. So I've selected a couple of, how much time have I got? 6:15, okay. I will, actually, before I read a poem, I just want to talk about something that I think is very important, that I'm not sure, I didn't hear it discussed, but the power of culture capital and the school trips, to be honest, like, school trips are some of my most powerful and important memories of my time in school was school trips, and not just trips with schools, but also trips that I went on with school friends. just as an example, my school took me to see a theatre production of 1984 by George Orwell. And we went before, because we had to study the book, and we went before we sort of started reading the book. And of course, I'm deaf. They take me along. No one thought, oh, wait, we're taking a deaf kid to the theatre and there's no subtitles, there's no accessibility. I sat there in the dark for 2 hours. I didn't hear a word of this play. But there was such an intensity to it. The lights, the sounds, the echoing, that atmosphere kind of stayed with me enough for me to go home and suss out the book 1984 for myself. So my mom has this bookshelf, and I found it on a bookshelf, and I read it just kind of on my own, just because I was so intrigued by all the things that I guess the atmosphere, even though I didn't hear the detail. And so I read it on, I guess, you know, I came to it in my own terms. And just, so despite me having this kind of inaccessible experience, I kind of still got something really powerful out of it. And George Orwell, you know, growing as I grew and grew in confidence as a writer and a reader, George Orwell was really important to me because of the kind of catalytic experience, you know, from the theatre, actually, from seeing this production of it. And I just, you know, want to say that I know that there's like all kinds of legality issues with insurances and stuff like that with school trips, but we really, from the schools I've been working in, schools I've been visiting and been been doing residencies in, the school trips just aren't regular things anymore, it seems. Again, I'm making a blanket statement. So this is just, again, based on my experience. I think I'm going to read then two poems. This first poem I'm going to read because I guess I was talking about the atmosphere and the background of a society, in a way, of the material, the fabric of a society, the air that we're breathing kind of speaks to that. So I'm just going to share with you a painting. So I lived in the south of America for a year with my wife. Oh, sorry, I can't share my screen because the host has disabled it. If I can, call him co-host. Sophia says, okay. So I lived in New Orleans, and I went into a gallery, and I was confronted with this painting. This painting is called Plantation Burial, and it's painted by a man called John Antrobus in 1860. And because my name Antrobus is a locational name, it's actually the name of a town in Cheshire. So everyone or anyone that you come across with the name Antrobus can be linked to Cheshire. So I know instantly, as soon as I see this painting, I am looking at an ancestor of mine who left England in the 1800s, went to Louisiana, where he knew slavery was taking place and plantations were happening. And he spent time on this particular plantation and witnessed this scene. And he's painted this, as you can see, the kind of forefronted, the people, the enslaved people who are working on the plantation, but are currently burying a loved one or a fellow worker, or, you know. And so if you look on the far right-hand side, you can see a couple, like they're kind of in the shade there. And on the left-hand side, you can see a man putting his arm on a horse. And then if you look up, and you can see all the different kind of trees that are around, and you can see all the different kinds of shades that are in this painting. And my wife happens to be an art conservator. So when she looks at paintings, the first thing she says is, I would have a hard time conserving this, or I would have a really great time conserving this. She rarely says that. But this painting in particular, she said she would have a hard time conserving, because not only is it an 1800s painting, the if you look at the texture, the paint that depicts the skin of these Black people, and even the shade, this is a particularly difficult color to preserve. And so, you know, my wife, in a very technical way, her name is Tabitha, said that like these people, whoever's conserving this painting has to keep, like, just to keep these people present in the painting, has to like do a lot of work. And that's just not the case for people with lighter skin and European looking people. So this kind of whole movement has happened with art conservators, where they've been x-raying canvases and finding a lot of Black figures who had actually been deteriorated or lost, and who were actually in the original painting. So in a way, that whole scenario, again, got me thinking about the material, the value of you know, how we value people, how we depict people, and how we understand them in our society. So this poem is called Plantation Paint. After Lorna Goodison and Plantation Burial in the historic New Orleans collection, 1860, oil on canvas by John Antrobus. Tabitha, the art conservator, squints at the color, tells me the paint depicting the Black of these men huddled for a burial will decay before the cypress trees surrounding them will decay. There are several kinds of Black, she says, and the cypress trees surrounding them is all I see as we stand alive in this otherwise empty gallery. Why am I like this? What am I like? Who does it matter to? All details question my way of seeing. I worry what kind of Black would mark me. I am not the paint made from vine twigs or burnt shells. I am not the lamp full of oil. Tabitha, tell me how you'd paint me. Tell me if I'm closer to the white painter with my name than I am to the Black preacher, his hands wide to the sky, the mahogany wrought of heaven. Sorry, what you know by now, but I can't mention trees without every shade of my family appearing and disappearing. So thank you. The last poem I'm going to read, I'm just going to read this because it's about a friend of mine who I went to school with. We were both similar in a similar position in that we're both deaf, we're both Caribbean heritage. We both played for the football team, the deaf football team and the hearing football team. We were both good enough at sport to generally avoid bullying. That was the secret with straight boys. You had to like be good enough at sport, and the bullies leave you alone. So generally, kind of, you know, I was the captain of the swim team. He was the captain of the football team at one point. Anyway, his name was Tyrone, and he was generally one of the most popular students, popular friends, popular kids in my school. And, you know, everyone, I think, relates to that. Everyone will have that memory of that person at school who was so popular. Everyone liked them, and, you know, and they were popular with whoever they were trying to court, you know, with the girls, boys, whatever. And it was always a kind of apparent to me that whatever happened to him when we left school, he would be okay. He would probably be, you know, in my mind, he was the most likely to be like a superstar, to go on and become a famous, I don't know, actor or dancer or athlete or something. But just before the pandemic, I found out that he had committed suicide. And what had happened to him is he ended up in prison, and again, he's deaf, and he ended up in prison without his hearing aids. His hearing aids broke, and he couldn't get them repaired. And he told the prison, the guards, multiple times about his hearing, about his hearing aids. It was never attended to. Like me, I think because of my my speech, people assume I'm hearing, and then I pass for a hearing person. And that in itself is its own kind of danger. That in itself is a kind of miscommunication. We saw what happened last month with the Nigerian 17-year-old black boy who was arrested by the Metropolitan, for the transport for London services, who then forwarded it onto the police, and he was a 17-year-old non-verbal boy, and it only took 24 hours for him to be almost deported from this country, even though he was born in London and had never left the country. Also, he was about to be deported to Nigeria, and he's not Nigerian. So again, this goes to the kind of vulnerability Black and brown people are in. If they can't articulate themselves, they will end up on they're just one situation away from ending up on, being deported from the country to a country they've never even been in. That's not even part of their heritage. Anyway, sorry, I digress. What happened to Tyrone was something that I never thought I'd be able to write about, but I was invited by the poet laureate of the UK at the moment, Simon Armitage, to write something that responds to one of the human rights declarations. And I just want to read you number 5 before I read the poem. And yes, so the number 5 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states, "No one shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment." And lastly, James Baldwin appears in this poem because I had pretended for many years that I had read all of James Baldwin's novels, and I hadn't. I'd actually read 2 novels of his, Go Tell It on a Mountain and Another Country. But during the pandemic, I read all of his novels, and I found it really striking that every one of his novels has a suicide scene in it, mostly Black men as well. So he appears in this poem. So I'm going to end with the poem. Thank you so much for listening. Apologies if I've waffled a bit. I do go on. I can talk all day. But yeah, it's always an honor to be heard. It's always an honor to know that things like this these conversations like this are being had meaningfully, especially at a political, infrastructural level, rather than just, media noise. For Tyrone Givens, the paper said, putting him in jail without his hearing aids was like putting him in a hole in the ground. There were no hymns for deaf boys, but who can tell we're deaf without speaking to us? Tyrone's name was misspelled in the HMP Pentonville prison system. Once I was handcuffed, shoved into a police van. I didn't hear the officer say why. I was saved by my friend's mother, who threw herself in the road and refused to let the van drive away. Who could have saved Tyrone? James Baldwin attempted suicide after each of his loves jumped from bridges or overdosed. He killed his characters, made them kill themselves. Rufus, Richard, Black men who couldn't live like this. Tyrone, I won writing awards, bought new hearing aids and heard my name through the walls. I bought a signed Baldwin book. The man who sold it to me didn't know you, me, or Baldwin. I feel I rescued it. I feel failed. Tyrone, the last time I saw you alive, I dropped my pen on the staircase. Didn't hear it fall, but you saw and ran down to get it. Handed it to me before disappearing, said, you might need this. Thank you.
Raymond, you'll hear my voice here. That was extraordinary and incredibly powerful. Being no doubt we've heard you this evening, being no doubt we'll be sharing this very widely through our community, and being no doubt at all that it really will underpin the whole focus of the whole of the conference series that we've had. It won't end here. You inspired us when you last came, and you have certainly moved us this evening. So I want to say thank you. We can clap online, and I'm sure everybody else can clap as well. And thank you to everybody, and good night.